Hello there and welcome back to my channel. My name is Doug, back with another fountain pen video. Today it's nib surgery. I've included this information in some of my previous videos, but I thought I'd devote an entire video to this process. Before we get too far into performing some surgery on some pen nibs, here is my disclaimer. I am in no way an expert in this field. I've only come across this information by watching experts work on their fountain pen nibs and by copying them and experimenting myself. I've only been doing this for about a year, so please do not try this at home.
Danger, Will Robinson, danger!
Even if you don't ruin your pen, you'll probably void your warranty. In addition, I've only done this to pens and nibs worth less than around $30 US. I've never done this to a gold nib. Actually, none of my gold nibs have actually needed any attention. If you ruin your favorite fountain pen by following my advice, it sucks to be you, and I don't want to know about it.
Canada sucks!
Now that you've been warned, remember, there are graphic scenes ahead. Avert your eyes if you're squeamish.
Don't go in, Jen. It's the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life.
I will put some links to specific videos you may want to watch in addition to this one, where more knowledgeable people than me demonstrate some of these techniques, like Chris Rep 52 and SRE Brown. Learning from these experts, I put together a technique that works for me. In order to do this video, I needed to have some pens to work on. The last three pens I've purchased were Penbbs, the 492 Mag Filler, a 308, and a 500 Spring Filler. You can find my video review of the 492 Magnetic Piston Filler right here, and the reviews for the new 308 and the new 500 will be forthcoming, maybe in the next week. The good news, bad news is that all three of these pens had dry nibs, typical of Penbbs. As far as the nib smoothness, the 492 and the 308 were like glass, but the Amber 500 needed a bit of a tweak. So this affords me the opportunity to tweak these pens on camera and show you the process I go through when I get a new pen to try. The first thing I do, from advice by Chris Rep 52, is to run a little soapy water through the pens. A small glass of water with a drop of dish soap does the trick. Then just rinse thoroughly with clean water. This gives you an immediate indication of ink flow, as well as getting rid of any oils left over from the manufacturing process. I will usually take the major parts of the pen apart, dry them out using tissue and compressed air. Sometimes the nibs and feeds come out, and sometimes they don't. Give you an example on my Galaxy. This pen does not need any tuning whatsoever. I use a little rubber shelf mat to cover the nib, and then just squeezing gently, give it a slight turn to protect. There we go. So you protect those feeds, because especially the Penbbs feeds are very, very fragile. And there's the nib assembly there. I generally won't need to take it any further apart, but sometimes if you want to change out a feed or whatever, or you want to clean this to change ink color, because you can't get all the ink out of there, sometimes you'll want to pull that out. And so again, wrapping the nib with the rubber or elastic band will do as well, and then pulling, you should be able to get the nib and feed out of there. I don't want to perform that kind of surgery on this pen. It's writing beautifully at the moment, and I don't want to disturb it. Before putting any ink in the pen, I'll look at the pen nib under a loop. So I'm going to take this 308, and here's the loop I use. It's a 10 times magnifier, and I've clipped this little guy to it as well. It's a little eyeglasses light, LED light that turns on, and it's meant to clip onto your eyeglasses, but I clipped it on to the end of my loop, and then I can point it down like that at the nib while I'm looking at it, and then take a good look. For camera purposes, I'm just going to use the camera zoom. So what I'll be looking for here first is alignment. You see those tines right there are nicely aligned. So that's what I'm checking for. I'm going to draw a diagram here to help illustrate this. So, I'm no drawing artist, but here's my best shot at it. Of the nib. Now, when looking end on at the nib, you end up with this kind of a view. So there are the two parts of the nib straight on, split down the center, and it should be flat. It should be able to go on the paper flat onto the surface, just like that. If you end up looking at a nib that looks like this, where there's a gap right there, you've got what's called baby's bottom. Because it looks like what it is, a baby's butt.
I like big butts and I cannot lie.
And so if the nib goes on the paper, there's a gap right there that won't allow ink to flow onto the page. So this kind of a nib might skip. So this is where you're going to need to polish that out a little bit, to flatten that out. And I'm going to talk about that and demonstrate that in a moment. But there's also this kind of situation where you end up with a nib that's misaligned. So one tine is higher than the other. And that's what I'm looking for when I first take a look under my loupe at the nib. I'm looking for alignment. Are those two tines aligned? Is this one a little bit higher than the other? And if that's the case, this one looks just slightly higher. So I'll take a fingernail and just push it down slightly, just like that. Maybe give it about 30 seconds or so. Once I've got them aligned properly so that they are perfectly on the paper, just like that, then I can test it on the page and see whether it's smooth or not. This one is right now just as smooth as glass. But I'm going to show you this one. Now this is the Amber as a Cat nib, and its tines are perfectly aligned. But when I try to write with it, it feels a little scratchy in some directions. Like this is fine. That's fine. This is slightly scratchy that way. And that even more scratchy. So what I do in this case is I get a piece of 12,000 grit micromesh and I start doing some figure eights. It's important to have ink in the pen because the ink lubricates the surface of the micromesh here. And what we want to do is run some figure eight patterns, just like that. And then I'll run the figure eights that way. Now I'm doing this at slow speed. Then I'll do a figure eight that way, and a figure eight that way. And then I'll go up and down, side to side, angle, angle, and then circle that way, circle that way. All the time I'm moving the nib back and forth, side to side, just like that. And I'm going to emphasize, if I had scratchiness that way, I'm going to want to focus on that, or that way. I'm going to want to focus on doing that a little bit more. So If you like reverse writing, I'll turn the nib over and do the same kind of thing. Circles, figure eights, angles. Only if you do that. I don't tend to reverse write, so I don't do that. So once I've done that a few times, I go back to my page. Check that direction, and test it out, see how it feels. That's very smooth now, and it says smooth as that 308 was. So all it was doing was taking some of the material off of that tip so that it was not scratchy. The next thing we want to look at with all three of these pens is their wetness. So this is the 308. And you can see it's relatively dry. Here's the 500. Same thing. And here's the 492. And that one's very dry, as you can see. So in order to make the pen wetter, we need to spread these tines apart. So I need a gap in there, so you can almost see a little bit of daylight through it. The way I do that is by using this tool. This is a spark plug gapping tool that you can pick up at any hardware store or automotive supply store. And a lot of people use brass shims, but I find this more usable because it has a number of different thicknesses of shims so that you can progressively move up. Now, I've learned this from Chris Rapp, that he'll take this tool and move up from the thicknesses. So if we start at the thinner side, here is a 2.002 inches or 0.051 millimeters, and then there's a 0.003, 0.004. What I've found is that the 0.004 tends to work 99.9% of the times. Chris always recommends starting with the lower one and moving up. If the lower one goes through easily, go up to the next one. If it goes through the slit easily, go up to the next one until you feel some resistance. So I'm going to do this with the 308 first. I will take the nib and I'll place it on the paper so that it's touching the page. This gives me some leverage on it so that I'm not slipping around. And then I take my shim and I place it, the edge of it, in the breather hole and then stroke it down. Push it into that breather hole like that, and you can see it spreads the tines, and then I'm going to drag it down to the paper. Now Chris continues just to stroke it a few times until you get the kind of thickness that you want, but I'll stroke it down like this once till I get it on the page, and I get the blade on the page and I get the nib on the page, and then I just push slightly to one side and then slightly to the other side, just gently, and hold it there. Then I'll check to make sure those tines are still aligned. If they're not, I'll adjust them. But then I'll check to see if I'm any wetter. It's a little bit wetter. Let me see if I can do this correctly. Okay, that's increased a lot. That pen is now very, very wet. See that? Let's take a look at the amber. pushed it back and forth a couple of times each on both sides. So the tines look nicely lined. Let's give it a try. Yeah, a little bit better. Do it again. Again, putting this on the page, and this, the section is actually touching the page, gives me a lot of control over that nib, so I don't spring it or slip. Just going to spread those tines a little bit more. I tend to push it until I feel back pressure, and then just hold it there. Now, other people are engineers, and metallurgists and so forth, but as far as I know, when you push a metal into a shape and hold it there, it has a memory to it. It's getting a lot better. I think I might just do that a little bit more. Just a couple of little tugs. There. Yep, that's getting very wet now. And one more pen to go. Now, this will be the most expensive pen I've ever tried this on. Again, I've never done this on anything over $30 before. And I don't want to scratch this either. This is that rose gold Year of the Rat. Oh, that slid in very easily. I'm always careful when I pull it out as well to make sure that I'm not springing that nib. Let's see. Yeah, it's not flowing as nicely as I'd like it to. But this slit is not giving me a lot of resistance. So I might go up to 0.05. I've never gone past 0.04 before. So this will be a first. That's a little bit more resistance. Yeah, it's a lot wetter. Oh boy, that's nice. Yeah, that's nicely wet. So again, your mileage may vary on this.
Your mileage may vary.
Others use different techniques. This has worked for me and is another good use of my ugly guitar picking fingernails. The key for me here is to be gentle and patient. One tine, a little push on the tine here, hold it for 30 seconds, that kind of thing, and check the wetness on it. Repeat if necessary. Now, as I said, the Penbbs nibs tend to come out of the box relatively drier than other nibs, but that's good for me, in my opinion, because it's easier to make a pen wetter than it is to make a pen drier. There are ways of making it drier, of course. I won't talk about them here, but it's a little bit more difficult. Again, this is my technique, and it has worked for me many, many times. I've seen other videos where nibmeisters will take the nib of the pen and push it on their thumbnail to spread those tines out. But I worry about that technique because I always worry about slipping. This technique gives me a little bit more control. I should also note that this technique will only get the pen as wet as that feed will allow. So if that feed there does not allow the ink flow any more than what the nib will take, you have to do some surgery on the feed itself. And that means taking a scalpel to the top channel of that feed. So if you have ink starvation issues of a feed that won't keep up, that's another type of surgery for which I'm wholly unqualified. If I ever take a scalpel to some feeds in the future and have any success at it, I'll be sure to share.
You too will feel the cutting edge of terror in Scalpel. Don't let Dr. Reynolds get his hands on you.
In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of pen surgery. And once you've done it a couple of times, it becomes a fairly simple process. But after saying that, if ever I had an issue with my Visconti or with my Pilot or with my Schaefer, like that, if I had an issue with these gold nibs, you can be sure I won't be putting a mechanic's tool on it like this. I would take it to a professional to have them work on it. So thank you for joining me for this on-camera experiment. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to be notified of any future videos. And that just leaves it for me to say thank you all for watching, and that's all she wrote.